My son inherited $28 million on a Monday and kicked me out of his life on a Tuesday. By Friday, he was on his knees at my door begging for help because he discovered that cursed money attracts real demons. Hello, my name is Margaret. I'm 52 years old, and this is the story of how my own son betrayed me in the most cruel way possible. But the universe has very creative ways of giving back what you deserve. If you've ever been rejected by someone you created, fed, and loved unconditionally, stay with me until the end. Because what happened next? Well, not even Shakespeare would write a twist like this. Subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments, do you believe that what we plant always comes back to us? My name is Margaret Harrison, and for 28 years I lived for a single person, my son Tyler. I lived in a modest 3-bedroom house in Springfield, Missouri, one of those small towns where everyone knows everyone, and secrets never stay hidden for long. The house sat on Maple Street, a quiet residential area where the biggest excitement was usually Mrs. Henderson's cat getting stuck in the oak tree or the annual summer barbecue where neighbors pretended to enjoy each other's potato salad. The walls of my home were painted a soft cream color that had yellowed over the years, giving everything a warm, lived-in feel that I told myself was cozy rather than outdated. The kitchen was small but functional, with linoleum floors that squeaked under your feet and cabinets that had been white once upon a time but had faded to an off-white that spoke of decades of use. The living room was dominated by a brown sofa I had bought used 15 years ago, covered with a floral throw blanket that hid the worn spots where Tyler used to sit as a child, eating cereal while watching Saturday morning cartoons. I was a widow since Tyler was 8 years old. My husband James died in a car accident coming home from work on a rainy December night. I remember the smell of rain that night, the phone ringing at 11:47 p.m., the trembling voice of the police officer telling me I needed to get to the hospital immediately. The drive to the hospital was a blur of windshield wipers and red taillights reflected on wet asphalt, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. When I arrived, a young doctor with tired eyes and coffee stains on his white coat took me aside and explained in gentle clinical terms that James had died on impact, that he didn't suffer, that there was nothing anyone could have done. The funeral was held 3 days before Christmas, and I remember thinking how wrong it was that the church was decorated with poinsettias and gold garland when my world had just collapsed. Tyler sat beside me in his only suit, a navy blue one that was already getting too small, his small hand gripping mine as neighbors and friends filed past offering condolences that felt like empty words floating in the cold December air. From that day forward, my life became a single mission, ensuring Tyler had everything he needed to become a good man. I worked double shifts for years, sacrificing sleep, social life, and any dreams I might have had for myself. Mornings, I was a secretary at the local elementary school, earning $28,000 a year, answering phones, filing papers, and dealing with frustrated parents who couldn't understand why their precious children had detention. The job was steady but monotonous, filled with the same conversations day after day. Mrs. Harrison, can you tell me why Billy got sent to the principal's office? Or, I need to speak to someone about my daughter's grades immediately. The office smelled perpetually of industrial coffee and copy machine toner, and my desk was positioned right under a fluorescent light that flickered just enough to give me headaches by noon. Evenings, I cleaned offices in the downtown area, earning another $15,000, scrubbing toilets, emptying trash cans, and vacuuming carpets in buildings where people made more in a month than I made in a year. The cleaning work was physically demanding, leaving my back aching and my hands raw from harsh chemicals. But it was quiet, solitary work that gave me time to think, to plan, to dream about Tyler's future. I would push my cart through empty hallways, the sound of the vacuum echoing off glass walls, wondering what Tyler was doing with his homework, hoping he was eating the dinner I had left for him in the refrigerator. Weekends, I baked cakes and made desserts by special order, turning our small kitchen into a makeshift bakery. Word spread through the neighborhood that Margaret Harrison made the best chocolate cake in Springfield. And soon I had a steady stream of customers ordering birthday cakes, wedding desserts, and holiday treats. The extra money wasn't much, maybe $2,000 or $3,000 a year, but every dollar went toward Tyler's future. School supplies, clothes that fit properly, the occasional movie or dinner out that made him feel normal, like other kids whose mothers didn't have to work 3 jobs to make ends meet. Our house wasn't large, but it was filled with love, or at least I thought it was. The living room had that brown sofa I had bought used, but I kept it impeccable, vacuuming it weekly and treating every stain like a personal affront. The walls were decorated with photos of Tyler at every stage of life. First lost tooth grinning gap-toothed at the camera, first day of school with his Superman backpack that was almost as big as he was, high school graduation in his cap and gown looking so grown up it made my chest tight with pride, college acceptance letter clutched in his hands like a golden ticket to the future I had worked so hard to give him. Tyler had always been a smart child, but complicated. Not that he was malicious, or at least I didn't want to believe that. He just had this strong, independent personality that sometimes manifested as coldness, a distance that I told myself was normal for boys, especially boys growing up without fathers. When other parents bragged about how affectionate their children were, how they still got bedtime kisses and spontaneous hugs, I would smile and say, "Tyler shows love differently," as if I had unlocked some secret about his unique emotional language that others were too simple to understand. During his teenage years, he rarely kissed me goodnight or thanked me for the things I did. When I asked if he loved me, he would roll his eyes and say, "Obviously, Mom." "Why do you need to keep asking that?" And I accepted this as a demonstration of affection, convincing myself that his exasperation was actually fondness, that his reluctance to express emotion was just masculine stoicism inherited from his father. I told myself that still waters run deep, that Tyler's love was just quieter than other children's, more mature, more sophisticated. Teenage years were particularly challenging, filled with the usual struggles of homework battles, curfew arguments, and the general surliness that seems to be standard equipment for 15-year-old boys. Tyler would slouch at the breakfast table, barely grunting responses to my attempts at morning conversation, his dark hair falling into his eyes as he scrolled through his phone with the intense concentration of a scholar studying ancient texts. "How did you sleep?" I would ask, setting a plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of him. "Fine," he would mumble, not looking up. "Do you have any tests today?" "Maybe." "Don't forget you have that dentist appointment after school." "Okay." These monosyllabic exchanges became the soundtrack of our relationship, and I learned to read meaning into the spaces between his words, to find connection in the simple fact that he was there, eating the breakfast I had made, wearing the clothes I had washed and folded, living under the roof I worked multiple jobs to maintain. Tyler graduated from high school with decent grades, not spectacular but good enough to get into the University of Missouri, where he decided to study business administration. I was so proud when he announced his major, imagining him in a sharp suit, commanding boardrooms, making the kind of money that would ensure he never had to work 3 jobs like his mother. The college years were a blur of tuition payments that stretched my budget beyond recognition, textbook costs that made me skip meals, and dorm fees that forced me to sell my car and take the bus to work for 2 years. I didn't mind the sacrifices. Every dollar that went toward Tyler's education felt like an investment in both of our futures. I imagined graduation day, Tyler in his cap and gown, thanking me in his valedictorian speech for all the sacrifices I had made, telling the crowd that everything he accomplished was because of his mother's unwavering support. The reality was more modest, but still filled me with pride. When he graduated with his degree in business administration, I sat in the packed auditorium, craning my neck to spot him among hundreds of other graduates, my heart swelling when they called his name, and he walked across that stage to receive his diploma. Afterward, we went to dinner at a mid-range restaurant where Tyler ordered the most expensive steak on the menu, and I didn't say a word about the cost because this was his day, his celebration, his moment to feel like anything was possible. When Tyler graduated at 22, he got a job at a consulting firm in Kansas City, about a 3-hour drive from Springfield. He rented a small apartment there and would come visit once a month, always on Sundays. These visits became the highlight of my existence, the bright spot I looked forward to through weeks of monotonous work and lonely evenings. I would spend days preparing for his arrival, cleaning the house until every surface sparkled, grocery shopping for all his favorite foods, planning meals like I was hosting royalty rather than my own son. The ritual was always the same. Tyler would arrive around noon, driving whatever car he could afford at the time, first a beat-up Honda Civic, then a slightly newer Toyota Camry, eventually working his way up to vehicles that reflected his growing success in the business world. He would park in the driveway, and I would watch from the kitchen window as he gathered his overnight bag and walked up the front steps, his posture straight and professional, already looking like the successful businessman I had always dreamed he would become. I would open the door before he could knock, my smile too wide and too eager, and say something like, "Tyler, how was the drive? You look tired. Are you eating enough? You look thin." And he would give me that patient smile and say, "I'm fine, Mom. The drive was fine. I'm eating plenty." I would prepare his favorite meal, lasagna with homemade sauce that took me 6 hours to make properly, starting with fresh tomatoes that I would blanch and peel myself, adding herbs from the small garden I maintained in the backyard, despite having no natural talent for gardening and less time to devote to it. The lasagna was accompanied by garlic bread made from scratch and a salad with vegetables so fresh they still had dirt clinging to them from the farmer's market. The house would fill with the rich, warm smells of home cooking, and for a few hours, everything felt normal, traditional, the way I imagined other families lived. Tyler would eat with genuine appreciation, sometimes even asking for seconds, and these moments made all the preparation worthwhile. Our conversations during these monthly visits were brief, but precious to me. "Tyler, how's work treating you?" I would ask, desperate for any glimpse into his adult life. "It's good, Mom. Challenging, but good." "Are you dating anyone special?" "Not right now. I'm focused on my career." "Do you need anything? Money? New clothes? I could send you some of those cookies you used to love." "I'm doing fine, Mom. Really." These short exchanges represented the entirety of our relationship, and I learned to treasure each syllable, to replay these conversations in my head during the long weeks between visits. I would analyze his tone, looking for signs of happiness or stress, searching for clues about his life that he didn't volunteer. When he said work was challenging, did that mean he was struggling? When he said he wasn't dating anyone, did that mean he was lonely? I wanted to ask deeper questions, to understand his inner life, his dreams, his fears, but something in his demeanor always stopped me. There was an invisible boundary around Tyler that seemed to say, "This far and no further," and I respected it because I was afraid that pushing too hard might drive him away entirely. At 25, Tyler got promoted to manager at his consulting firm, and the change in his lifestyle was immediate and visible. He bought a BMW, a black sedan that gleamed like a mirror and smelled like leather and success. He moved to a larger apartment in a better neighborhood, one with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that he described to me with obvious pride. His visits became less frequent, dropping from monthly to every other month, sometimes stretching to 10 or 12 weeks between appearances. "I'm so busy at work, Mom. You understand, right?" And I did understand, or I forced myself to understand. Success demanded sacrifices, and if Tyler was truly successful, then my own sacrifice of seeing him less often was worthwhile. I told myself that this was the natural progression of a parent-child relationship, that independence was the goal I had been working toward all along. During these years, I continued living modestly in the same house where Tyler had grown up. The place was showing its age in ways I couldn't afford to address. The roof leaked during heavy rainstorms, forcing me to position buckets strategically around the living room. The refrigerator made an ominous grinding noise that kept me awake some nights, but replacing it was impossible on my budget. The furnace was so old that repair technicians would whistle low and shake their heads when they saw it, but it still produced heat, so I nursed it along with prayers and duct tape. I never asked Tyler for help with these household problems. Pride, perhaps, or maybe fear that he would see me as a burden, someone who couldn't handle her own life. I wanted him to be proud of his independent mother, not worried about her or worse, annoyed by her neediness. So I dealt with leaky roofs and dying appliances on my own, seeing these challenges as character-building exercises rather than signs that I was slowly drowning in the responsibilities of maintaining a life and a home on minimal income. In the last 3 years, Tyler had begun dating a woman named Brittany. She was beautiful in that polished, high-maintenance way that spoke of expensive salons and designer clothes. Brittany was blonde with perfect teeth and manicured nails that never showed chips or imperfections. She wore clothes that I recognized as expensive even though I couldn't identify the brands, the kind of outfits that cost more than I made in a month. When she accompanied Tyler on his increasingly rare visits to Springfield, she treated me with a cold politeness that felt worse than outright rudeness. "Hi, Margaret," she would say, never calling me Mrs. Harrison, or showing any of the respect I had been taught to show to the mothers of my boyfriends when I was her age. Her voice was always perfectly modulated, pleasant on the surface, but empty of any real warmth. She would perch on my old brown sofa, like she was afraid of catching something, checking her phone constantly and making comments about how quaint everything was in a tone that made quaint sound like a synonym for pathetic. Tyler seemed completely enchanted by her. I watched the way he looked at her, the way he smiled when she spoke, the way he deferred to her opinions and preferences. It made me happy to see him in love, but it also made me feel forgotten. Like my role in his life was becoming smaller with each visit, less important, more easily replaceable. The dynamic between the three of us was awkward and strained, with Tyler caught between his desire to impress Brittany and some lingering sense of obligation to me. Conversations became even more superficial when she was present, focusing on safe topics like the weather or current events rather than anything personal or meaningful. 6 months ago, Tyler called to inform me that he and Brittany had gotten married in Las Vegas. "A small ceremony," he said, "just the two of them." "Why didn't you invite me?" I asked, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice and failing completely. "It was a last-minute decision, Mom. You know how these things are." But I didn't know how these things were. I had spent years dreaming about Tyler's wedding, imagining myself helping to plan the perfect day, walking him down the aisle since his father wasn't there to do it, dancing with him at the reception while everyone watched and smiled at the sweet bond between mother and son. I had pictured myself in a tasteful mother-of-the-groom dress, maybe navy blue or burgundy, something elegant but not attention-stealing. I had imagined giving a toast that would make everyone cry with its perfect balance of humor and sentimentality. Instead, I learned about my son's wedding the same way I might learn about a stranger's marriage, through a phone call after the fact. "I'm so happy for both of you," I lied, swallowing the disappointment that tasted bitter and sharp in my throat. After the wedding, Tyler's visits became even more infrequent. He came alone now, without Brittany, maybe once every month or two, staying for 2 hours before making excuses about the long drive back to Kansas City. Our conversations became even more stilted, reduced to basic pleasantries that revealed nothing about his actual life. "How's married life?" I would ask. "Good, really good." "How's Brittany?" "She's fine, busy with work." "When are you going to give me grandchildren?" "Someday, Mom. We're not ready yet." I felt increasingly distant from his life, like I was watching him through a window instead of being an actual participant in his world. But I consoled myself with the thought that this was natural. This was how things were supposed to work. Children grow up, get married, build their own lives. My job was to support from a distance and be grateful for whatever scraps of attention he could spare. 3 weeks ago, everything changed when Tyler received a phone call that would alter both our lives forever. It was from a lawyer in St. Louis, informing him that his great-uncle Harold, his deceased grandfather's brother, had passed away and left his entire fortune to Tyler. Harold Harrison was a peculiar man, a loner who had made his fortune through shrewd investments in oil and stock markets. Nobody in the family had maintained much contact with him over the years. He lived in a mansion outside St. Louis, rarely attended family gatherings, and when he did appear at funerals or weddings, he would sit in the back, speak to no one, and leave as soon as politeness allowed. Tyler had met him exactly 3 times in his life, always at family funerals, and their interactions had been limited to brief handshakes and Harold's gruff comments about how much Tyler had grown since the last time he'd seen him. The inheritance was $28 million. $28 million! A sum so large it seemed fictional, like something from a movie or a fantasy rather than reality. When Tyler called to tell me the news, his voice was shaking with emotion and disbelief. "Mom, you're not going to believe this. Uncle Harold left me everything, everything." "My God, Tyler, that's incredible." "I know, Brittany's absolutely over the moon. We can buy a mansion, travel the world, have everything we've ever dreamed of. I'll never have to work again if I don't want to." In that moment, I felt a surge of hope that I hadn't experienced in years. Maybe now Tyler could help me with the house repairs that I'd been putting off. Maybe we could travel together, visit places I'd only seen in magazines. Maybe he would include me more in his new life, now that money wasn't an issue. "Tyler, this means you might move away from Kansas City?" "Probably. We're thinking Los Angeles or Miami. Somewhere that rich people live, you know? Somewhere with better weather and more opportunities." "And the visits?" "Oh, Mom, I'll definitely keep visiting. Maybe even more often now that I won't have to work 60-hour weeks." I hung up the phone with my heart full of anticipation. Finally, I thought, my son would have the means to be more present in my life. He could afford to visit more often, to stay longer, maybe even to help me fix some of the problems with the house that I'd been ignoring because I couldn't afford to address them. How wrong I was. The change in Tyler's behavior began subtly, like a slow leak that you don't notice until the damage is already done. He still called me, but there was something different in his voice, a coolness that I initially attributed to the stress of managing such a large sum of money. I imagined that having $28 million would come with its own set of problems. Financial advisors to coordinate with, investment decisions to make, tax implications to consider. In the second week after receiving his inheritance, he called me on a Thursday evening, and immediately I could tell something was off. "Mom, I need to talk to you about some things." "Of course, honey. What's on your mind?" "Well, Brittany and I have been talking about the future, and we've decided to make some important changes in our lives." "What kind of changes?" My stomach began to knot, with an anxiety I couldn't yet name. "Changes that will allow us to grow as people, you know? To free ourselves from certain obligations." The word obligations hit me like a physical blow. Was I an obligation? "Tyler, I don't understand what you mean." "You will soon, Mom. I just wanted to prepare you." "Prepare me for what?" "For changes, big changes." He hung up without saying goodbye properly, which was unusual even by his standards of brief phone calls. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation in my mind, trying to decipher what he had meant. A part of me whispered that something terrible was coming, but I forced those thoughts away, telling myself I was overreacting, reading too much into a simple phone call. The following Friday, Tyler appeared at my house unannounced. It was around 2 in the afternoon, and I was washing dishes when I heard his key in the front door lock. "Tyler, what a wonderful surprise." But when he walked into the kitchen, his expression wasn't that of someone making a pleasant surprise visit. His face was serious, almost grim, with the kind of determined look people wear when they're about to deliver bad news. "Mom, we need to talk." "Of course, sweetheart. Would you like some coffee? I made those chocolate chip cookies you used to love." "No, Mom. Sit down." The imperative tone scared me. Tyler had never spoken to me like that before, with that kind of authority, as if he were the parent and I were the child. I sat down at the kitchen table, and he remained standing, creating a power dynamic that felt intimidating and wrong. Mom, I'm going to be direct because I don't like to beat around the bush. Brittany and I have decided that it's time to cut some ties that are preventing us from evolving. Ties? What ties? Mom, you need to understand that I'm an adult man, married, and now wealthy. I have different responsibilities now. I know that, Tyler, and I'm so proud of you. The problem is that you still treat me like I'm a child, always calling, always asking about my life, always expecting me to come here every month like some kind of mandatory check-in. Every word felt like a slap across my face. I had never thought of our conversations as bothersome, never imagined that my interest in his life was seen as intrusive rather than loving. Tyler, I worry about you. I care about you. I'm your mother. Exactly. You are my mother. Past tense. You did your job. You raised me, educated me, sent me to college. Congratulations. Mission accomplished. I felt like someone had sucked all the air out of my lungs. The casual cruelty of reducing our relationship to a completed job assignment was breathtaking in its heartlessness. What are you saying? I'm saying that Brittany and I want to start fresh, without baggage from the past, without family obligations that tie us down. Tyler, I never tied you down to anything. I've always supported your decisions. Mom, your very existence ties me down. Every time I come here, I see this house falling apart. I see you working those dead-end jobs. I see you living this small life, and I feel guilty. Guilty about what? About having more than you do, about being successful while you're still here in the same house, same life, waiting for me to show up to give some meaning to your existence. His words cut so deeply that I felt physical pain in my chest. The accuracy of his observation made it even more brutal. I did live for his visits. I did structure my life around the hope of seeing him. I did derive most of my sense of purpose from being his mother. Tyler, you are my family. You're all I have. And that is exactly the problem, Mom. I can't be everything to you. It's too much pressure, too much emotional responsibility. I never asked you for anything. You don't have to ask. It's in your eyes every time you look at me. It's in the way you clean this house when you know I'm coming to visit. It's in the way you talk about me to the neighbors, like I'm your greatest achievement in life. Everything he was describing was true, and that truth made his words even more devastating. I had thought these were normal expressions of maternal love, but Tyler saw them as burdens, expectations, emotional manipulation. Tyler, I don't understand what you're getting at. I'm getting at the fact that I need you to stop existing in my life. The silence that followed was deafening. I stared at my son, searching his face for any sign that he was joking, having some kind of breakdown, or anything that might explain the words that had just come out of his mouth. Stop existing in your life? That's right. Brittany and I are moving to Miami next week. We're going to start a new life, with new people, without connections to the past. Tyler, I'm your mother. I'm not the past. I'm family. You're a reminder of a time in my life when I was poor, dependent, limited. Now I have $28 million, Mom. I can be whoever I want, do whatever I want, go wherever I want. And I don't want to carry the burden of a needy mother holding me back. The word burden echoed in my head like a scream. After 28 years of sacrifice, of working multiple jobs, of giving up everything for his success, I had become a burden. Burden? Tyler, how can you call me a burden after everything I've done for you? Everything you did for yourself, Mom. Let's be honest here. You didn't raise me out of altruism. You raised me because you needed a purpose in life after Dad died. I was your project, your reason for living. And now you want me to be grateful for a lifetime and carry that gratitude like a chain. I was crying now, but he continued relentlessly, each word calculated to cause maximum damage. Brittany helped me see this. She showed me how family relationships can be toxic when one party is emotionally dependent on the other. Brittany. Of course, everything made sense now. She had been whispering poison in his ear, convincing him that his mother's love was really manipulation, that his family ties were really chains. Tyler, please don't do this. We can work this out. We can find a middle ground. There is no middle ground, Mom. Either you're part of my life or you're not. And I've chosen that you're not. He stood up from the table and walked toward the door, his movements deliberate and final. Tyler, wait. Mom, this is better for both of us. You'll be able to focus on yourself, find new hobbies, maybe even find a boyfriend, and I'll be free to build the life I deserve. What if I need you? What if I get sick? You're 52 years old, Mom. You're not elderly. Figure it out. Those were the last words he spoke to me before walking out of my kitchen and out of my life. I sat in that chair for 3 hours, staring at the door through which my only child had exited my world. The smell of the lasagna I had prepared for him still lingered in the air, a cruel reminder of the meal he would never eat. The cookies were cooling on the counter, perfectly golden brown and fragrant with vanilla, destined to go stale because the person they were made for had just declared that I no longer existed in his universe. The table was set for 2, as I always did when he came to visit, with the good plates and cloth napkins that I saved for special occasions. But this time, he wouldn't stay for dinner. He would never stay for dinner again. 3 days after our devastating conversation, on a Monday morning that felt as gray and lifeless as my soul, I received an envelope in the mail. I recognized Tyler's handwriting on the front immediately, and for a wild, desperate moment, my heart leaped with hope. Maybe it was an apology letter. Maybe he had come to his senses and realized he had gone too far. Maybe he was asking for forgiveness and wanting to rebuild our relationship. I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was an official-looking document and a 2-page letter written in Tyler's precise, business-like handwriting. The letter read, "Mom, after consulting with my attorney, I am formalizing our permanent separation. The attached document is a voluntary cessation of familial relationship, in which I declare that I no longer have any type of bond, obligation, or responsibility in relation to you, to ensure there are no future misunderstandings. 1. Do not contact me by phone, email, letters, or social media. 2. Do not appear at my workplace or residence. 3. Do not use my name to obtain credit, loans, or any kind of favor. 4. Consider yourself legally orphaned as of the date of this letter. I know this may seem harsh, but it's the only way to ensure we can both move forward. I hope you find peace and purpose in a life that doesn't depend on my presence. I didn't sign this as your son because I'm not anymore. Tyler Harrison, formerly your son." I read the letter 3 times before I could fully process what was written there. My own son had sent me a family divorce letter, complete with legal language and numbered demands. But the cruelest part was in the attached document. It was a notarized declaration signed by him and 2 witnesses, stating that Margaret Harrison possesses no legal or moral rights over any aspect of the life, properties, or decisions of Tyler Harrison. At the bottom of the document was a clause that destroyed me completely. Tyler Harrison declares that Margaret Harrison has been adequately compensated for child-rearing expenses through the emotional and social benefits of having been a mother, and considers all accounts between the parties to be settled. Adequately compensated for child-rearing expenses. 28 years of my life reduced to a business transaction that had been settled in full. I sat on the living room floor and cried until I had no more tears. Then I cried without tears. Then I just rocked back and forth, trying to understand how I had reached this point, how the child I had loved and sacrificed for had become capable of such calculated cruelty. That night, I called my only close friend, Linda, who lived in the house next door. Linda had been my neighbor for 15 years, and she had watched Tyler grow up, had seen firsthand the sacrifices I had made for him. "Linda, can you come over? I need to talk to someone." 15 minutes later, Linda was sitting in my kitchen, reading Tyler's letter while I made tea with hands that still shook from shock and grief. "Margaret, this is monstrous. How can a son do this to his own mother?" "I don't know, Linda. I keep trying to figure out where I went wrong." "You didn't do anything wrong. I've known you for 15 years. I've seen how you sacrificed for that boy. Working 2 jobs, giving up everything for him. But he said I did it for myself, that he was my personal project." "So what if he was? What's wrong with that? You're his mother. It's natural for a child to be their mother's most important project." Linda reached across the table and took my hand. "Margaret, you need to understand something. You raised a sociopath. Normal people don't do this. People with hearts don't do this." "But he's my son." "No, honey, he was your son. Now he's just a cruel stranger who happened to come out of your womb." Linda's words echoed in my head for weeks afterward. In the days that followed, I discovered more details about Tyler's new life through Facebook posts from mutual acquaintances. He had purchased a mansion worth $3.2 million in Miami Beach. The photos showed a house with an infinity pool, ocean views, luxury cars in the circular driveway, and rooms so large they could have housed 3 families comfortably. In one photo, Tyler and Brittany were toasting with champagne on the mansion's terrace, the Miami skyline glittering behind them like something from a movie. The caption read, "New beginnings are beautiful when you have the courage to leave the past behind." New life. No baggage. Total freedom. No baggage. I was the baggage he had courageously left behind. I enlarged the photo and studied Tyler's face, searching for any sign of doubt or regret. He looked genuinely happy, happier than I had ever seen him. It was the happiness of someone who had just dropped a heavy weight they had been carrying for years. The weight was me. That night, for the first time in 28 years, I didn't pray for my son before going to sleep. During the 3 weeks that followed Tyler's formal disownment of me, I lived in a kind of trance. I continued working my 2 jobs, maintained my house, kept up appearances with neighbors and acquaintances, but inside I was completely shattered. The routines that had once given my life structure now felt meaningless. Mechanical actions performed by a woman who was going through the motions of living without actually being alive. Linda visited me every day, trying to lift my spirits, encouraging me to go out, to do something for myself. But I couldn't process what had happened. The reality was too large, too devastating to absorb all at once. It was like trying to understand the size of the ocean by looking at a single wave. It was on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after receiving Tyler's letter, that things began to get interesting. I was at the grocery store, mechanically pushing my cart through aisles that all looked the same, when I ran into Dorothy Chamberlain, an acquaintance who worked at the bank where Tyler used to make his deposits when he still lived in Kansas City. "Margaret, how are you doing? And Tyler? I heard he got incredibly rich." "I'm doing fine, Dorothy. Tyler is following his own path." "How amazing about that inheritance, right? But tell me something. Did you know that Great-Uncle Harold left a very specific clause in his will?" My heart stopped. I felt the fluorescent lights above us suddenly seem too bright, the canned music too loud, the temperature too cold. "Clause?" "Yes. My husband works at the law firm that handled the will. He said Harold left the money to Tyler with a very clear condition, that he take care of his family, especially his mother, since he knew Tyler was an only child and that you were a widow." I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. The grocery cart suddenly felt too heavy to push, and I had to grip the handle to steady myself. "Dorothy, are you sure about this?" "Absolutely. In fact, the clause states that if Tyler abandons his mother or fails to care for her, the inheritance should be redirected to charitable organizations." "And how would they know if he abandoned me?" "Well, the will establishes that every 6 months, for the first 5 years, Tyler needs to prove he's maintaining regular contact and offering financial support to his mother. If he can't prove it... Dorothy didn't need to finish the sentence. The implications were crystal clear, and suddenly everything made sense in the most devastating way possible. "Margaret, did you know about this?" "No," I answered honestly, my voice barely above a whisper. "Tyler never told me about any clause." "That's strange, because the lawyer said both Tyler and the family beneficiary, in this case you, should have received copies of the complete will." I drove home in a daze, my mind racing with this new information. If Tyler knew about the clause, and he obviously did, it meant his decision to abandon me wasn't just gratuitous cruelty. It was premeditated, calculated, and he had a plan to work around the will's requirements. That evening, I called the law firm Hendricks & Associates in St. Louis. My hands were shaking as I dialed the number, and I had to clear my throat several times before I could speak clearly. "Good afternoon. I'd like to speak about the will of Harold Harrison. I'm Margaret Harrison, Tyler Harrison's mother." "One moment, please." Several minutes passed, and then a masculine voice answered. "Mrs. Harrison, this is attorney James Hendricks. How can I help you?" "Mr. Hendricks, I'd like to obtain a copy of Harold Harrison's complete will. I'm the mother of the primary beneficiary." "Of course, ma'am. Actually, I'm surprised you're only calling now. I sent a copy to your address 3 weeks ago, along with the copy that went to Tyler." "I never received any copy." Silence on the other end of the line. "That's very strange. I have the delivery confirmation right here. It was signed for by Tyler Harrison at your address." Tyler had intercepted my mail. The betrayal ran even deeper than I had imagined. Not only had he abandoned me, but he had deliberately prevented me from knowing about the will's conditions that were designed to protect me. "Mr. Hendricks, could I receive a second copy by email?" "Certainly, but I need to alert you about something important, Mrs. Harrison." "What?" "Mr. Harold Harrison's will contains specific clauses about family welfare. Tyler is aware of this, but, well, from what I've observed in our contacts, he doesn't seem to be fulfilling all the requirements." "What kind of requirements?" "Mandatory monthly contact with his mother, financial support when necessary, and a biannual audit to prove the family is being adequately cared for. The first audit is scheduled for 2 weeks from now. And if he doesn't pass the audit? The inheritance is immediately revoked and redirected to the charitable institutions specified in the will." I hung up the phone with a feeling I hadn't experienced in weeks: hope. Tyler had made a fatal error. In his rush to get rid of me, he hadn't considered that I would discover the will's clauses. He was probably counting on my ignorance and passivity to slip through the audit unnoticed. But I was no longer the passive Margaret he thought he knew. That night, I printed out the complete will that the lawyer had emailed me. It was 47 pages of dense legal language, but on page 23, I found the section that would change everything. Clause 7, Family Responsibilities, Beneficiary. Tyler James Harrison must maintain regular contact and offer adequate support to his mother, Margaret Ann Harrison, recognizing that she sacrificed her own financial prosperity to ensure his education and development. Minimum contact, 2 monthly visits or 4 monthly phone conversations, financial support, availability for emergencies, and contribution to home improvements when requested. Audit. Every 6 months, Tyler must present documented evidence of compliance with these obligations. Penalty for non-compliance. Should Tyler Harrison fail to comply with any aspect of this clause, or should he abandon, neglect, or treat Margaret Harrison cruelly or disrespectfully, the entirety of the inheritance will be immediately redirected to the following institutions. 3 more pages followed, listing the charitable institutions that would receive the $28 million. I read the clause 15 times. Harold Harrison had been smarter than Tyler had imagined. He knew my son's character and had created protection for me. I picked up my phone and recorded a message. "Tyler, it's me. I know you don't want to talk to me, but I need to inform you about something important related to Uncle Harold's inheritance. Call me as soon as possible. It's urgent." I sent the text message. 15 minutes later, my phone rang. "What the hell do you want?" "Tyler, did you read Uncle Harold's complete will?" Silence. "Tyler, what are you insinuating?" "I'm asking if you read about Clause 7. An even longer silence. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Tyler, don't lie to me. The lawyer sent me a copy of the will. I know about the family obligations." I heard him take a deep breath on the other end. "Mom, you don't understand. I can hire lawyers to contest those clauses. With $28 million, I can afford any lawyer in the country." "Tyler, the audit is in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Do you have evidence of regular contact with me? Do you have evidence of financial support? Do you have evidence that you didn't abandon me cruelly?" Another silence. "Tyler, are you there?" "I'm thinking." "Thinking about what?" "About how to solve this." "There's only one way to solve this, Tyler. You need to come back to being my son." "Never." "Then you're going to lose $28 million. "I'll find a way, Mom. I always do." He hung up. But for the first time in weeks, I smiled. My son had underestimated 2 things: my intelligence and Uncle Harold's wisdom. Over the next few days, I realized the pain was beginning to give way to something new inside me. It wasn't hatred. It wasn't just anger. It was strategy. For the first time in decades, I wasn't thinking about how to save my son. I was thinking about how to save myself. I began acting in silence. I didn't tell Linda anything, didn't tell anyone. I just took a deep breath and dove into every detail of the will, line by line, absorbing the conditions that Tyler could never fulfill without my cooperation. If he wanted to erase me from his life, maybe it was time to let him taste the bitter flavor of his own poison. The next morning, I placed a small hidden camera in the living room, aimed at the bookshelf full of family photos. I turned on my phone's recorder and began writing a detailed diary, recording every humiliation and every piece of evidence of abandonment. The official family divorce letter, his text messages, even screenshots from social media showing him celebrating his new life while treating me like baggage. I was building my dossier. It was like preparing ammunition for a silent war. And the cruelest part, perhaps the most efficient, was not telling him anything. I didn't warn him that I had proof, didn't warn him that I had already spoken to the lawyer, didn't warn him that I could report his abandonment during the audit. I just stayed silent. Strategic silence, silence that cuts deeper than words. Meanwhile, I made small choices designed to trigger his paranoia. That night, I deliberately let the phone ring without answering when I saw his number. The next day, I reposted on my social media a photo of dinner with Linda, laughing, happy, with the caption, "When God closes a door, it's because he's about to open a huge gate." I knew Tyler would see it, and I knew it would burn him like a spark of nervousness. 2 days later, he called me again. I answered this time. "You didn't talk to anyone about the clause, did you?" he asked without preamble. I took a deep breath and answered calmly. "Tyler, you made a point of kicking me out of your life. Why do you think I would still talk about you?" Silence on the other end. Heavy silence, full of distrust. He could no longer read me. And that was the first sign that my silence was working. I was busy, yes, but not busy thinking about him. I was busy building my strategy. I printed all the evidence. I classified it in folders: abandonment, humiliations, public evidence. I wrote a formal letter to Harold's lawyer reporting the facts, but I didn't send it immediately. I left it ready, next to a sealed envelope. I slept peacefully, knowing that at any moment I just had to put that envelope in the mail and Tyler's fortune would dissolve like sand. It was silent power. I didn't have dollars, didn't have mansions, didn't have luxury cars, but I had the key piece that decided the fate of the 28 million. My silence. And God knows how deafening silence can be. On the third night after discovering the claws, around 3 in the morning, I was awakened by desperate knocking at my door. At first, I thought it was some neighbor needing help, but when I opened it, I saw a familiar figure on his knees, face covered in sweat, terrified look. It was Tyler. "Mom, please, help me. I don't know what to do anymore. The money, the things that are happening. It's not normal. It's like I bought a curse, not a new life." His eyes, which always carried coldness, were red, desperate. He was shaking like a lost child in the dark. At that moment, I remembered the smell of lasagna cooling on the table 3 weeks ago, the untouched cookies on the counter, and the chair where I sat waiting for a son who had denied me. Now that same son was on his knees, begging, and deep down, I already knew. This story still held its darkest twist. The first thing that struck me when I opened the door was the smell. Tyler had always been meticulous about his appearance, always smelling of expensive cologne and success. But now he reeked of fear, that sharp, acrid scent of someone who hasn't slept in days, mixed with something else I couldn't identify, something that reminded me of sulfur. "Come in," I said quietly, stepping aside. Tyler stumbled into my house like a drunk man, his expensive clothes wrinkled and stained. The designer suit that probably cost more than I made in 3 months was torn at the knee, and his usually perfectly styled hair was disheveled, sticking up at odd angles as if he had been running his hands through it compulsively. He collapsed onto the same brown sofa where he had learned to read as a child. But now he was a stranger. The house smelled different now, too, less sweet, heavier with resentment, and something else that made the air feel thick and oppressive. I wanted to ask, "What did you do?" But I held back the impulse, serving water in a cracked mug like a communion ritual. Silently, I sat in the armchair and observed him. He was breathing heavily, his eyes wide and unfocused, staring at something invisible on the ceiling. His hands trembled as he brought the mug to his lips, and I noticed his fingernails were bitten down to the quick, something he had never done, even as an anxious child. "You look pale, Tyler." "What happened?" I asked, using that tone that mixes concern with disdain. He didn't respond immediately, just continued staring at the ceiling as if expecting something terrible to descend from above. I spent the entire night just listening and watching. He didn't sleep, didn't eat, didn't speak anymore. He just sat there, reconnecting with a past that no longer belonged to his new world, trapped on the sofa that didn't fit into his millionaire lifestyle. I registered everything: gestures, tremors, the sound of his breathing, even the silent tears that fell onto my old carpet, tears that seemed to carry more than just salt water, as if they were washing away pieces of his soul. On Saturday morning, when the sun finally lit up the living room, Tyler went to the bathroom and stayed there for almost half an hour. He left the door open when he came out, and I saw that he had washed his face compulsively. The sink was covered with water and soap suds, and the mirror was fogged with steam. It was as if he were trying to wash away something that wasn't physical, something that had stained him from the inside. During the entire weekend, I maintained my routine. I cooked, had coffee, answered calls from Linda. I pretended life had returned to normal, while inside I was transforming into a spectator and chronicler of the announced punishment. It was only Saturday afternoon that he began to speak. His voice was low, like someone afraid of being overheard by invisible ears. "Mom, do you believe in curses?" An unexpected question, spoken in the tone of someone not seeking comfort, but absolution. I nodded without really answering. It was my moment to observe, to gather evidence, to understand what would be his next move, and mine. On Saturday night, I did something I had never had the courage to do. I followed Tyler when he went out to get some air. I stayed behind the door, listening to him talk frantically on the phone. I took out my phone's recorder and captured everything, every desperate phrase, every veiled threat exchanged between him and Brittany. I spent almost $150,000 in just the first 2 days. The pool exploded. They kept saying it was bad luck. "Brittany, I heard voices yesterday, things moving in the house, doors slamming by themselves. On the other end of the line, Brittany spoke quietly, but anger dripped through. You need to resolve this with your mother. Resolve it quickly or we'll lose everything. On Sunday morning, I searched his coat pocket. I found an almost empty whiskey bottle and a torn piece of the will, with Clause 7 highlighted in marker. That was my most valuable evidence. Tyler was terrified of the audit, terrified of the price of exclusion. I didn't show anything. I let him feel, for hours, the weight of his own abandonment. In the afternoon, I sat across the room and, as if casually, began to speak. Tyler, do you remember the story of when you lost your first tooth? You cried for 2 hours, but then smiled at me and said, Mommy, now I'm stronger, right? He didn't respond, just stared at the floor. I knew those little memories were weapons, not to attack him, but to remind him of what was at stake. In silence, I kept recording every reaction, every tremor, every disguised plea. On Sunday night, I sat in the armchair and with a calm voice murmured, Not every mother deserves a fortune, but not every son deserves the name he carries. It was my revenge, eloquent silence, strategic waiting. He needed me to save the fortune, but now he knew my word was worth more than any million deposited in the bank. On Monday, 2 days before the first audit deadline, Tyler finally begged. On his knees, trembling like a boy, he held my hands and cried, Mom, I didn't know what I was doing. Help me, please, I'll do anything. Just don't take everything away from me now. I breathed in the smell of madness that hung in the air. My heart almost gave in. But it wasn't time for mercy yet. It was time to show that even love has limits when threatened by ingratitude. I spoke in a low voice, looking into his eyes. I taught you about the value of truth, Tyler. Now it's your chance to decide. Do you want to be my son, or do you want to be a man alone with cursed millions? He cried, sobbed, tried to hug me. For the first time in my life, I was the one who pulled back. I was the one who denied the embrace. You want me to save you? Show me you deserve it. Tell the truth to the lawyers, to me. Only then will I help you. Only then can our story begin again. While Tyler collapsed in tears, I felt a strange peace invade me. The power had changed hands. Only then did I realize the only thing stronger than money is the power of someone who has already survived abandonment. On the morning of the audit, the sky over Springfield was gray, heavy, as if the universe itself knew that life was about to turn upside down. The smell of burnt coffee filled the kitchen, echoing my anxiety and Tyler's trembling hands, who didn't even dare look at me. He had spent the night wandering around the house, sleepless, murmuring disjointed phrases, sometimes blaming the money, sometimes remembering distorted childhood memories. Sometimes he would stop in front of the photo shelf as if trying to recognize himself in that boy with the easy smile. But now he was just a man haunted by the price of his choices. The lawyer arrived at exactly 9 o'clock, carrying a brown folder and a laptop with an open camera. They would conduct the meeting via video conference with 2 office employees and a special auditor. Tyler tried to compose the perfect character, polite, attentive, wearing a freshly pressed white shirt, but sweat was already running down his neck before the call even began. I, silent, observed. I felt the weight of my life's script about to be reviewed live. Good morning, gentlemen. We're here to evaluate compliance with Clause 7, the auditor began, his voice neutral and implacable. They asked Tyler to present evidence of contact, respect, support. He delivered some cold reports, issued checks, screenshots of superficial conversations. I just observed, without confirming anything, without denying anything. The atmosphere was one of silent battle. The palm of my hand still felt the texture of the envelope of the letter I never sent, the last trump card kept in reserve. The auditor turned to me. Mrs. Harrison, do you confirm that you received all support, regular contact, and respectful treatment in the last 6 months? My mouth opened, but hesitated. I looked at Tyler, and there I understood. He lacked humility. It was time for complete unmasking. "Mr. Auditor, may I show you some things?" I asked. I presented the expulsion letters, the recorded documents, the audio recordings of conversations where I was called a burden, and from the night I was formally disowned. Absolute silence. The old Springfield house seemed to freeze around us. The auditor listened to everything, saw the evidence, and finally spoke. "Tyler Harrison, you have failed to comply with all essential conditions of the will. Your inheritance will be redirected according to the penalty clause." The pain on his face was indescribable. More than money, abandonment now had a literal price. Brittany wasn't there to cushion the blow. For the first time, the man who wanted to erase his mother became hostage to his own mistake. Minutes later, we received a phone call. It was Brittany, desperate, screaming on speakerphone. "Margaret, please say something. Since this money came into our lives, horrible things have been happening. Doors slamming by themselves, noises at night, objects moving. And now, after this audit, everything got worse. I can't take it anymore." Tyler grabbed the phone, trembling. "Mom, I need to know, are you praying against me? What's happening to our house?" I looked into his eyes, feeling a mixture of pain, pity, and quiet revenge. Money that comes loaded with ingratitude never brings peace. You tried to erase the one who gave you life. This is how demons are born, when justice is torn apart. Brittany was crying, saying she could no longer sleep, that she heard voices in the bedroom at night. She described how mirrors would crack spontaneously, how food would spoil overnight even in a perfectly functioning refrigerator, how electronics would malfunction in ways that defied explanation. The pool, their pride and joy, had developed mysterious leaks that no contractor could fix. The water would turn red without explanation, forcing them to drain and refill it repeatedly. Tyler began to have a breakdown, saying he saw shadows on the walls, that he felt someone watching while he showered. Lights flickered, the pool leaked blood from nowhere. They called priests, pastors, mediums, nothing worked. Every religious figure they consulted would enter the house and immediately want to leave, claiming the spiritual atmosphere was too dark, too corrupted for them to cleanse. At the end of the call, the auditor confirmed the blocking of funds and announced that all properties in Tyler's name would be transferred to charitable institutions. At the exact moment the news fell, a strange wind swept through the Springfield house. The smell of sulfur, sudden, invaded the environment. Tyler threw himself on the floor, crying, asking for forgiveness like he never had before. The supernatural events that Brittany described weren't just affecting their Miami mansion. As Tyler knelt on my kitchen floor, sobbing like a child, I began to notice strange things happening in my own house. The temperature dropped suddenly, making our breath visible in small puffs of vapor, despite the fact that the heating was working perfectly. The lights dimmed without anyone touching the switches, and I heard what sounded like whispers coming from the walls themselves, not voices I could understand, but a low, constant murmur that seemed to follow Tyler wherever he went in the house. Over the next few days, as Tyler remained in my home out of sheer necessity, sleeping in his old single bed, the phenomena intensified. Objects would move slightly when no one was looking directly at them. I would find books fallen from shelves, pictures hanging crooked, doors that I was certain I had closed standing wide open. The old grandfather clock in the hallway, which had been broken for years, suddenly started working again, but it ran backward, its hands moving counterclockwise as if time itself was trying to undo what had been done. Tyler would wake up screaming in the middle of the night, claiming that he felt hands grabbing at him in the darkness, trying to pull him somewhere he couldn't see. During the day, he was jumpy and paranoid, constantly looking over his shoulder as if expecting to see something terrible lurking just outside his peripheral vision. He stopped eating regularly and lost weight rapidly, his cheekbones becoming more pronounced, his eyes sunken and surrounded by dark circles that made him look like a ghost of his former self. I prayed at night in silence, using the same words I once pronounced for him when he was small. Protect my son, wherever he is. But something had changed. Deep down, I understood that not even forgiveness erases deep scars. The investigation into Tyler's supernatural torment began when Linda, my neighbor, started experiencing strange dreams. She would wake up in the middle of the night with vivid images of a tall, thin man in old-fashioned clothes standing in her backyard, pointing toward my house. The man never spoke, but Linda always woke up with the distinct impression that he was trying to tell her something important, something about the Harrison family history that had been buried but was now clawing its way back to the surface. It was Linda who suggested we look into Harold Harrison's background more thoroughly. "Margaret," she said one afternoon while we sat in my kitchen, Tyler upstairs in his old room, refusing to come down for meals. "Don't you think it's strange that a man who barely knew your son would leave him such a massive inheritance? Especially with those specific conditions about taking care of you." I had been wondering the same thing. Harold had always been a mystery to our family, appearing only at funerals, speaking to no one, leaving as soon as the services ended. James, my late husband, had mentioned his uncle occasionally, usually in the context of family gossip about Harold's reclusive lifestyle and growing wealth, but never with any real insight into the man's character or motivations. That evening, I called the Hendricks law firm again. "Mr. Hendricks, I have some questions about Harold Harrison's background. Was there any particular reason he structured his will the way he did?" "Mrs. Harrison, I was hoping you might call about that. Harold was very specific about his intentions. He came to see me several times over the past 5 years to revise and refine his will. He seemed to know quite a bit about your family situation, about your sacrifices for Tyler, and about Tyler's personality." "What do you mean by that?" "Harold believed that money without character was dangerous. He said he had made his fortune through means that weren't always honorable, and he wanted to ensure that his inheritance would either reform Tyler or destroy him. Those were his exact words: reform or destroy." The lawyer's words sent a chill down my spine. Harold had deliberately set up a situation where Tyler would face a moral test, and the supernatural events were the consequence of his failure. "Mr. Hendricks, did Harold ever mention anything about unusual aspects of his wealth?" "Funny you should ask. Harold was obsessed with what he called spiritual debts. He believed that money obtained through exploitation and cruelty carried what he termed karmic consequences. He spent his later years trying to balance the scales through charitable donations, but he was convinced it wasn't enough. And now? Now it seems those consequences have transferred to Tyler, along with the money. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I climbed the stairs to Tyler's old room, where he lay curled under blankets despite the warm summer air, shivering and mumbling to himself. The room smelled of fear and desperation, and I could hear what sounded like scratching inside the walls, as if something was trying to claw its way out. "Tyler," I said softly, sitting on the edge of his bed, "I know what's happening to you." He looked at me with eyes that were no longer the cold, calculating eyes of the man who had disowned me. They were the frightened eyes of a child who had awakened from a nightmare only to discover that the nightmare was real. "Mom, I think I'm losing my mind. I see things, hear things. The money, it's like it's alive, like it's angry." "It's not the money, Tyler. It's the price of cruelty. Uncle Harold's wealth came with spiritual debts, and when you abandoned the one person whose love was unconditional, you activated a curse that was always waiting." Tyler grabbed my hand with surprising strength. "Can you fix it? Can you make it stop?" I felt the weight of that moment, the power to either save or damn my son. Part of me wanted to let him suffer as I had suffered, to let the supernatural forces teach him the lesson I had been unable to teach through love and sacrifice. But another part, the part that had never died despite everything he had done, still recognized the frightened child beneath the cruel man. There's only one way to break this curse, Tyler. You have to give back what you stole. I didn't steal anything. You stole 28 years of my life, my dreams, my future, and then threw it away like garbage. You stole the love I gave freely and declared it worthless. You stole my identity as your mother and tried to erase it from existence. Tyler was crying now, deep, wrenching sobs that shook his entire body. I can't give back time, Mom. I can't undo what I did. No, but you can acknowledge it. You can publicly admit what you did. Return to being my son, not because you have to, but because you choose to. And you can use whatever inheritance remains to make amends, not just to me, but to everyone Harold's money hurt over the years. The supernatural phenomena continued for 3 more days while Tyler wrestled with his decision. During this time, neighbors began to notice strange things happening throughout our usually quiet street. Mrs. Henderson's roses, which had bloomed beautifully all summer, withered overnight and turned black. The Johnson family's dog, normally friendly and calm, became vicious and had to be restrained after attacking several passers-by without provocation. Children playing in their yards would suddenly stop and stare at my house with expressions of terror, as if they could see something adults couldn't. The local priest, Father Michael, visited on Wednesday afternoon after several parishioners reported disturbing dreams about our neighborhood. He was a young man, recently assigned to our parish, and he had the eager confidence of someone who hadn't yet encountered anything that challenged his faith. That confidence evaporated the moment he stepped onto my front porch. "Mrs. Harrison," he said, his voice already trembling, "I can feel something here. Something very old and very angry." I invited him in, and he immediately began to sweat despite the air conditioning. Tyler was in the living room, sitting on the sofa and staring at nothing, occasionally mumbling what sounded like apologies to people who weren't there. Father Michael approached him cautiously. "Son, would you like to make a confession?" Tyler looked up with wild eyes. "Father, I tried to erase my mother from existence. I took $28 million and used it to buy my way out of love, out of family, out of every decent thing I was ever taught. And now I think something is coming to collect the real price." Father Michael nodded gravely. "The spiritual world has its own economics, Tyler. What you owe can't be paid with money." The exorcism, if that's what it was, happened on Friday night. Father Michael returned with 2 other priests, older men with serious faces and eyes that had seen things they preferred not to discuss. They brought holy water, crosses, and a thick book bound in worn leather that looked like it had been used for similar situations many times before. Tyler consented to the ritual, desperate for any relief from the torment that had consumed his life. They gathered in the living room, the same room where Tyler had learned to read, where we had watched countless movies together during his childhood, where I had waited for him during those long years when his visits became increasingly rare. The priests began to pray in Latin, their voices rising and falling in ancient rhythms that seemed to make the house itself respond. The temperature continued to drop until frost began forming on the windows despite the summer heat outside. The lights flickered violently, sometimes plunging us into complete darkness before blazing back to life with an intensity that hurt our eyes. The scratching sounds in the walls became more pronounced, as if whatever was inside was trying desperately to break free. Tyler writhed on the sofa, speaking in voices that weren't his own, cursing in languages none of us recognized. At one point, he looked directly at me, with eyes that had turned completely black, and said in a voice like grinding glass, "He chose gold over love, mother woman. He chose emptiness over fullness. He chose death over life. The price must be paid." The ritual continued for 4 hours. At its climax, Tyler began to scream, a sound so filled with anguish and terror that neighbors 2 blocks away would later say they heard it and felt compelled to lock their doors and windows. Then, suddenly, complete silence. The temperature returned to normal. The lights stopped flickering. The scratching sounds ceased. Tyler collapsed onto the sofa, unconscious but breathing normally for the first time in weeks. When he awoke the next morning, something fundamental had changed. The coldness that had always characterized his personality was gone, replaced by what seemed like genuine remorse, and for the first time in his adult life, humility. He looked at me with clear eyes and said simply, "Mom, I'm sorry. I don't know if I can ever make this right, but I want to try." The aftermath of the supernatural intervention was both profound and subtle. Tyler's inheritance was indeed revoked, with most of the $28 million going to charitable organizations as specified in Harold's will. However, the lawyer, Mr. Hendricks, had discovered a codicil that provided for a modest sum, $50,000, to be given to Tyler if he successfully completed what Harold termed spiritual rehabilitation under his mother's guidance. It wasn't enough to buy a mansion or live extravagantly, but it was enough to start over, to build something real rather than something based on unearned wealth. Tyler used the money to rent a small apartment in Springfield, within walking distance of my house. He got a job at the local hardware store, the kind of honest physical work he had never imagined doing during his years of corporate ambition. The pay was minimal, but it was earned through his own effort rather than inherited through family connections. For the first time in his life, Tyler truly understood the value of a dollar and the dignity that comes from earning one's own way. Brittany, as I had expected, disappeared the moment Tyler's fortune evaporated. She filed for divorce within a week of the audit, claiming irreconcilable differences, and moved to Los Angeles with a new boyfriend she had apparently been cultivating as backup during her marriage to Tyler. Tyler was hurt by her abandonment, but not surprised. He had learned through bitter experience the difference between love and opportunism. The supernatural events that had plagued both Tyler and the neighborhood ceased completely once he made his genuine commitment to rebuilding our relationship. The atmosphere in my house returned to normal, warm, comfortable, filled with the simple peace that comes from authentic human connection, rather than the artificial harmony maintained through fear or obligation. Tyler began visiting me every few days, not because a will required it, but because he had rediscovered the comfort that comes from unconditional love. We talked more in those first few months of his rehabilitation than we had in the previous 10 years combined. He told me about the emptiness he had felt during his corporate success, the constant pressure to maintain an image that had nothing to do with who he really was, and the way Brittany had gradually isolated him from everyone who might have reminded him of his values. In return, I told him about my own struggles, the loneliness of the years after his father died, the pride I had felt in his achievements mixed with the growing sadness of watching him become someone I didn't recognize. We both acknowledged that our relationship had been unhealthy before the crisis, with me placing too much of my identity in his success and him carrying resentment about the weight of my expectations. But crisis, we learned, can sometimes clear away the debris of years of miscommunication and reveal what has always been true underneath: that love, when it's real, survives even the worst betrayals and creates the possibility for genuine renewal. The house repairs that I had been putting off for years became a joint project. Tyler, with his newfound appreciation for physical work and his modest but steady income, helped me fix the leaking roof, replace the dying refrigerator, and update the furnace that had been held together by prayer and duct tape. Working together on these practical tasks created a new kind of intimacy between us, based not on his success or my sacrifice, but on shared effort toward common goals. Linda watched this transformation with amazement and occasional skepticism. "Margaret," she said one afternoon while Tyler was up on my roof, hammering new shingles into place, "are you sure this change is real? People don't usually transform this dramatically." I understood her concern. The Tyler who was now coming to dinner twice a week, helping with household projects, and actually listening when I talked about my life, bore little resemblance to the cold, ambitious man who had formerly disowned me. But I had seen what fear can do to a person, and I had also seen what grace can accomplish when someone is finally ready to receive it. "People can change, Linda," I replied, watching Tyler wave at us from the rooftop, his face tanned and healthy from outdoor work, his eyes clear and present in a way they hadn't been for years. Sometimes it just takes losing everything to remember what actually matters. The first Christmas after Tyler's fallen,